And my nephew in Arizona says it's over 100 Fahrenheit and will be for the next 4 or 5 months.
I know.
So
My
don't go there.
parents
Oh,
are,
that's where you're from, though. You're a Zoni. That's right.
right. Yep. My parents, my sister, they're all suffering right now, trying to find escape as best they can with the current lockdown conditions or stay-at-home conditions.
And Calroy, with her video magic, will cut out this conversation, even though we wish we could record it.
It's talking about the weather.
Yeah, nobody in Ireland ever does that.
No.
First topic of conversation every day.
You get a lot of weather changes for sure.
Not really. No, it's pretty good. We've had about 3 months of sunshine now. We're getting fed up with it at the moment.
So we're live on YouTube.
You see, you have to do Brexit, then you change the weather with it.
Don't worry about Brexit. That's sorted.
So Calroy, I'll mention about the panelists extremely quickly, but then go to that second page for me here in just a moment.
Okay. Please mute yourselves when you're not speaking. Thank you.
Oh.
Welcome, everyone. This is the 6th town hall between WHO and IFMB-CED here in May, and this will be a summary. We've got a great panelist, very relaxed if you joined a little early, as you saw. So after my brief update, Adriana will share some updates, and then we will do critical topics review across the 5 topics, and that will include not only a chair summary, but also a poll that will facilitate the rest of that 10 minutes for each topic. I want many of you have seen the CED resource website for COVID-19, and please go there because we're going to continue to update the documents that you can download from there, including the Q&A updates. And lastly, I will just mention that we're summarizing and doing a synthesis of these 5 topics, and we will publish that on June 8th. Thanks for joining us, and Adriana. I believe she might be muted.
Unmute. Sorry, apologies. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to join you today, and really thankful for IFMB for all the support that has been given for the dissemination of these webinars. Today is a recap from the past events, and I would like to just open with this slide in which we were discussing in the past events things about the masks and the PPE, but also about the nasal pumps, catheter, oxygen, ventilators, etc. So we've been talking about all these issues, and they remain very important now that COVID is more like a chronic stay, and then we really need to find out solutions to make sure that all these technologies are available where they are most needed, and they are appropriate and suited for the use, and they are used appropriately. I would like to update you on some things. So I have my slides here. Of course, they will be shared with all of you, and the websites are there. But the first is on the general information on COVID. I think most of you would have seen it in the WHO website. But I just want to warn you that the website of the papers on the articles or the information has changed. So it is very important that you're aware of that. And then you have to sometimes scroll down to find the different topics and the different papers. So, of course, here you have the general situation of the world, and the press conferences are all here in this website. This is one example of the technical publications site. These are all the technical guidance. The technical guidance, you have here a drop-down menu. So please make sure that you scroll here, you click the drop-down menu in order to go down and find the different sources. This is, I put here, the one for essential resource planning. That is the one that is more involved, that has more information regarding exactly our area of work on medical technologies. And so what appears here is the global supply chain system catalog. And this catalog contains all the priority medical devices that could be purchased by WHO to deliver to member states. So I will go through the steps, but we also have now the supply area in which countries place their request. And then these are exactly the products that could be procured by WHO for member states. Other organizations as UNICEF, UNOPS, and others are also purchasing. Countries are purchasing by themselves, and we also have some others that are receiving money from the World Bank, but purchasing through WHO. So there are many mechanisms that are available, but it is good that you find all the information here. And of course, all the technical specifications for all the work that has been done with by all the team, Alejandra, now Gabriela, Francesco, the people that have been presenting to you, they have been working very heavily on these technical specs and then on the validation of the offers that are coming to WHO. It is important that you all know that the WHO Academy is already working. This was launched in France by President Macron because he gave all the facilities to do it in Lyon. But now it is available. So because of COVID, everything accelerated. And then all of a sudden, all the information for training and capacity building and everything is done through the WHO Academy. So there are apps. You can download it from the app stores, from the Google Play Store, and they are in different languages, English, French, Russian, Spanish, Arabic, and there is more to it. So if you want to download it, because the idea is that much more information will be available by online sources, as you can see here, because people might not be able to travel to train people all the time that we want. So please look into the WHO Academy. There are many programs that are coming through that. Then another very important thing is, as you heard from the World Health Assembly at the end of this week, but also on last week on Friday, there will be a lot of money that will be placed into research and development. So the main areas are this one: vaccines, diagnostic, and therapeutics. For the diagnostics is all, or of course, for the vaccines, you all know, there are more than 150 trials going on today. So the idea is that all this information is shared among the different member states and the researchers. The second one is about diagnostics. So it is on the in vitro diagnostics that, as you all know, it is the PCR and the protocols were there in WHO, and there have been now 5 pre-qualified, well, not pre-qualified, but listed in WHO as for emergency use only. These are the available products that could be used for PCR testing in countries today, in platforms. For rapid testing, there is still not enough products available that could be, they have the sensitivity and specificity that is needed, but still some regulatory authorities are listing them. So this area on the diagnostics is very important. And then the one for therapeutics is mostly on medicines, but there is global NGOs that are insisting that also in therapeutics, oxygen and other related medical devices can come in here. So this is the global research. This is the supply portal. This is like the logistics or supply. So this is Paul Molinaro, that is on the World Health Emergencies supervisor, and then he takes care of all the supply chain system. You can click in here and then do the whole video, but then this links to this one. This is the portal, and this portal includes all the priority medical devices that we've been talking about, all the catalog. It's here about the diagnostics, the therapeutics, the PPE, and then you go here into the portal, you click in here, and then you have all, and then you can request what is needed. You have the different options, etc. The critical items are all here listed on the list of priority medical devices, invasive, non-invasive, and technical specifications. And the website that we have been sharing, it's not so new. It's been there now like 3 weeks, but anyway, it is there available. And please, 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 we ask you if you can please fill in the inventory. We need to have some information from countries. Chai and PAD are helping in 14 countries. Other countries are receiving other help to do this. We acknowledge, and I really thank Bill, Gentles, and others that gave us some information, how complicated it is to fill this in. What we just want is just fill whatever you can. If not, then we will have no information. If you can fill more information, but remember the information is owned by the facility and then it will be shared globally and regionally. This is the survey. UNICEF is having another survey. Sincero, they have another survey. So it doesn't matter which kind of survey, we will try to compile all the information later. And so now things that are under development, this is a very important one. This is about training. So all the training tools for all the medical devices for clinical management, that will be for oxygen, for the BiPAPs, ventilators, pulse oximeter. And then the idea is to have all these training apps for the selection, procurement, and so for the setup, for the decontamination, cleaning, and sterilization, for inspection and maintenance, for patient use, decommissioning, and maintenance. So these are exactly all the pillars that we will be working on in the next month. And regarding personal protective equipment, there's a new experts group. Today will be the 3rd time to meet. They will be discussing about reuse, the standards, local production, quality assurance. And just on local production, I would like to tell you that Ying and myself were in a meeting with UNIDO and WHO to talk about the standardization, testing, and local production. Another product that will be coming from WHO soon is the WHO help desk that will guide anybody that has questions about the response or the request or the supply or the catalogs. So with that, I thank you very much all, and I'll be listening to the discussion later. Thank you. Over to the next.
Yes, we will go to PPE and Dr. Leandro Piecchio.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Adriana, for this introduction. I will not take long. I want to just remind to the attendees what has been covered in the webinar dedicated to PPE, which happened at the 8th of May, if I'm correct. And basically what we did was we started setting the floor, and Busola did a very nice introduction with Tom. And then Yingling Lin, which has been an intern and consultant for a long time for WHO, gave a very nice overview of what do we mean by PPE, what is the difference between PPE mask and the medical device mask, what are the relevant standards that people should consider, what should we look after in case we consider to buy or not a PPE in our hospital, and what manufacturers should consider in terms of standard, and what are the priority tests that probably should be prioritized at this moment of crisis when we need fast access to the market, but still quality, which is an important issue. And then Adriana gave a very comprehensive overview of the World Health Organization perspective on PPE beyond the COVID crisis, because obviously their expertise started now many years ago, probably reinforced by the outbreak of Ebola, as I can remember as last dramatic event, which forced the attention towards protective equipment. And then we had a very nice presentation from Nigeria, Dr. Popola and Professor Akinloye, which gave a perspective of a representative sub-Saharan country, Nigeria, and what are their main priorities now facing this COVID crisis when it comes to protective equipment. And then we opened the discussion to the floor, and we got a lot of questions. Probably the most recurrent one was about what should we do? Can we reclean? Can we sterilize the mask and those kind of questions, which the fact that we are giving a webinar doesn't mean we have all the answers, but we made an effort to collect as much as possible answers, and Busola did a great job in making a resume of this webinar, which will be circulated soon if it is not yet already available. I will not need to enter more in details because this webinar is freely online, and you can go there and review the part that you may need and you may have more interest in. And then we closed the discussion commenting on the fact that international standards are good, they ensure quality, but to some extent, they have revealed some frailty now in time of crisis, and probably every time when we think about lower income countries, because those standards have been going in a direction which were as much comprehensive as possible, covering all the possible working place, including, I don't know, heavy metal and stuff like that, which are probably not relevant for hospitals. So narrowing down those international standards, what we really need now in clinical environment, it's really important, and it's legally viable, because in this moment, the European Commission granted the opportunity to follow WHO guidelines instead of traditional standards when we think to manufacture and put on the market novel PPE and some medical devices. Okay, I would take no more time, but just invite you to review the material which has been put online on the YouTube channel of the IFMB, and the one that will be circulated soon in terms of resume and the answers to the questions we collected. Thank you.
Thank you, Leandro. Now we're going to go to a poll about this topic, and Calroy is going to make that available to you. And at the bottom of your tabs, I believe on your Zoom, you can see the polls tab, and go on and go to that now. We're going to take a few seconds of silence for you to consider and act on the poll, including the panelists. Thanks. So check out the poll, and we're going to see your results, and we're going to discuss those results as our approach to discussion of this particular topic this morning. So haven't seen you taking the poll yet, so go ahead, and you'll see the polls right next to the Q&A at the bottom of your tab. And okay, we've started to see the votes, so go ahead and do that now, everybody, please. So the questions for those that are having any trouble with that, and the numbers are rising, thank you. Do you find the WHO-CED Town Hall webinar information on PPE? Could you find it? And of the following subjects, the biggest challenge to you are, and you can select up to 4, safe use, specifications, installation, and so on. Do you or your organization have technical information or procedures on PPE that can be publicly shared with WHO and CED community, and check those? So 3 questions. Thanks, and we're getting some good voting here. So Leandro, as we get to maybe 30% or more of the group online, which we're at right now, you can begin a discussion on that, if you will.
So do we have time for questions? And please, I invite all the attendees to write whatever question you may have in this moment or observation in the question and answer box. We will do our best to answer those questions live, but if we will not have time, we will continue offline, and the answers will be published soon. So if you look down to your screen, you should have a question and answer cloud box where you can answer those questions. Adriana, I have a question for you. You mentioned during the webinar that a novel guideline from the World Health Organization was going to be published soon about PPE. You mentioned this also before the working group. Is this new guideline being made available yet? Do you want to say something on that?
It is not available yet. Sorry, it's not available yet. It will be any time. We thought it was going to be published today. It's not yet, but that contains the different uses of the mask from community and then for healthcare workers. And that will be the update of the rational use of PPE that has been now the most downloaded document in WHO, actually, that one. No, so this will supersede that one, but still not available. As soon as it is available, maybe I'll send the link to CED so that they can publish, or we can send it to all. But if I may say, we wanted also to see if you all agree that we use your emails to send you the newsletter, the WHO newsletter, and then we can add it there. Over.
Fantastic. Okay, Tom, in the sake of time, I would go on if you agree. And meanwhile, if we get questions, probably we can answer to those questions later.
Sure. but I'm going to let the panelists just weigh in just for a moment. We see from the poll, and about half of the group has responded on it, and yeah, they're finding the webinars reasonably useful. Getting on to the next challenges, safe use is 60% of the answers around safe use. So Adriana, I'm going to ask you just to mention maybe things about how folks can deal with safe use. And another thing that's a little bit further behind, but we haven't talked about a lot, is decontamination. And I know we're going to say more about that probably in a June webinar. But Adriana, in response to what you're seeing here on these challenges.
Yeah, is there any way that you share your screen? Because we cannot see, at least I cannot see the responses for the polls. I don't know.
Okay, I don't know, Calroy, if you can share that with others or.
They will be shown and shared to everybody when the poll ends. When
All
you
right,
give-
I'm going to go on and
Okay.
show mine then.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, we have the question from the poll, which is about homemade protective equipment. I think this was another thing which came across our last meeting, during our last meeting. And my personal opinion is that obviously, if you have nothing better and you are a civil person, I mean, person taking care of your health, probably this is better than nothing. But our focus on quality, regulatory framework, safety was for workers. So we need to raise the attention about quality, which test is relevant, because we need to save and protect our NHS workers. And this was where the discussion was going on mainly. I don't know if Adriana, you want to add something more in that?
Okay. Thank you, Leandro. Yes, the guidance from regulators is basically on medical masks and surgical masks. I mean, surgical masks, medical N95, and so on. For homemade use, there was nothing. But because a lot of the population has been asking about it now, even regulatory authorities are giving some guidance on that. So that is something that we wanted to discuss, and that will be discussed by the experts on PPE, so that we can try to find out what will be needed for local manufacturing and what are the different specialties. But the new guidance document actually contains that part about if you use cotton or other material, and so what are the layers, etc. So yeah, that would be good. Okay, Tom, may I comment something important?
Please.
For the ones that voted in the poll, I think to please confirm that the poll that you're asking, that you be receiving, are specific for the specific topics. So for example, installation or maintenance does not apply to PPE. So I just want to raise that issue, because you will be receiving a poll, and maybe we didn't explain that very well, but you will be receiving a poll like this for every topic. So it is important that your responses for the poll just say it every topic. And in case you say you have material that WHO can use, we didn't have a space here to put it, but just send it through the question and answers saying, I have a material, no? So that then we know who to contact later. Thank you.
All right, we will go on to the next topic, and I believe that's CPAP. So Farid.
Sorry, I was on mute. Good morning, everybody. I would like, first of all, to thank, of course, Tom and Adriana and everyone. And thank Adriana and Leandro for your interventions, very interesting. I would like to thank the organizers for giving us another opportunity to complete the resources proposed at the session of non-invasive ventilation. I'm going to try to provide you the feedback that we had last time in the chat exchange in the Q&A tab. We might think that the audience seemed very satisfied with the medical content that was already pretty much complete. And as a result, there was a small lack of time to address technical issues. Most of people thought it was very interesting with excellent medical and technical skills. But we felt through the feedbacks a lack of few information to have clear ideas about the advantages and disadvantages of all these solutions for LMICs. So the most frequent asked questions was which is the most efficient solution? How much does it cost? Is it easy to get it? Does it consume a lot of oxygen? And generally, what are the challenges it faces in terms of use and installations? That was answered with the excellent presentation of Adriana in a way, but it was I think, it was not sufficient. So does it require medical skills to use it? Does it need high-level skills in maintenance? So we have tried to do our best to respond to the Q&A in the most comprehensive way, but we felt it wasn't enough. And it seemed to us the most logical to synthesize all these requests through a document allowing us to remind the story of the session and the aims of our topic. And on top of it, it includes, of course, technical data we didn't have the time to address during the session. That is why we propose to term this synthetic document, which he called summary. And to answer to Ranjo about the video, for those, we think that for those who do not have the time to watch a 1 hour video, they can be able in 10 minutes by browsing through a document like this one to get an idea of the theme, the topic, and the issues, and eventually go further in understanding by watching the video. So what is in this, what's in this summary document? We have not obviously gone back over the presentations provided by Gilles Donner, my friend doctor, and Adriana, with all the extremely relevant contents of the WHO. As you all know, Pascal who was supposed to launch the debate and the technical exchanges in reaction to these 2 initial presentations, was unable to connect, and we were a little bit surprised as it was the first time for us, for the AFIP. And as a result, this document quickly reminds us of the moment in the patient's care pathway when non-invasive ventilation can be used. And the 2 main objectives of these treatments are to assist the respiratory work and the massive oxygenation of the airways of the patient, these patients, and especially the medical equipment available to apply this treatment with their advantages and disadvantages. With 2 large families, the families of ventilators in CPAP and BPAP modes, the effectiveness, the safety of patient management was no question, but rather the medical and technical skills, the financial means, and their use implies. As it is a session with priority destination to LMICs, we insisted on solution to answer for a very simple specification.
Farid, 30 seconds, because we need to get to polling.
Okay, easy to use, inexpensively available on the market, with very little maintenance and not high medical competence, and easily mobilized even outside the intensive care units. You will thus in this document find the 3 large families of which proposes non-invasive ventilation in mode CPAP and BPAP according to the devices, the advantages and the disadvantages, the oxygen consumption, the challenges of installation, and their level of availability on the market. You'll note with the slides of the presentations, you'll find notes with the slides of the presentation proposed during the session. And finally, we have included in each of the items discussed for each of these devices short tutorial videos that clearly explain how these sets are made up and how they are used. And we hope that in this case, it will be overall in terms of content to meet your expectations. Thank you, Tom. Over.
Thank you. The poll has been opened, and see people voting on the topic of CPAP. Thank you, Farid. And remind you that there's also the Q&A tab, and there's been some answers provided there already.
I'm monitoring it.
While the poll is going up for a moment, some of the questions on the tab were, is it possible to have reused PPE for an African country? Adriana, I don't know if you want to respond to that.
There are reusable PPE, that's the closed PPE based on cotton. But and the N95 can be reused if you have special sterilizers like a sterile. Well, that's all that we have now. And there are some research being developed now by Yingling and others. That is, if an N95 can be reused after putting it like more than 60 degrees for 2 hours in a dry hot stove, for example, no, or so. But this is now being tested. We don't have all the evidence to make a final decision. It has to be done not only with surrogates, but also with the actual virus to make sure that that happens. So it's not available now. Over.
Thank you.
So Tom, this is one of the areas where you see a lot of local production and innovation, and that is in PPE arena. And number one, it's easy to reproduce or construct a piece like that. But the point, like Leandro was making, is that the effectivity and the protection is deteriorating as you go from disposable item to make it a reusable item. And we need to realize that you lose characteristics. It's important to understand that the process has an effect and factor on your protection. So be careful and study the specification and the regulatory advisement on that.
Yeah, just to complement what Yadin says, they have specifically maybe 2, 3, 4 times that you can re-sterilize, no more. No, for example, for every different product, you have a specific times that you can do, and then you have to test it again. Over.
Tom, if you may, I would have a question for Adriana
Okay.
about one of the CPAP devices that she presented us during the session, which is an innovation. I would like to know if she has more information about this device that seems to be very promising and
Well,
new.
actually, I do remember very well. It is the UCL CPAP one that was approved by MHRA. But so far, the recommendation from WHO is that it cannot be used in low resource settings unless you have a high pressure, high volume of oxygen, have enough medical and nurse ratio per patient, and enough PPE. So this is being reevaluated. The provider was asked to do more tests and to test it in different settings so that then it could be recommended, but so far it's not recommended. And that is what I put in the slide. It says, be careful on the settings. So they can tell you it works marvelous in one setting. Once you change the setting, it might not work. Even if it is less costly and it says it's easier to manage, we need to find that. Over.
Thank you.
All right. I'm not seeing any other big questions come through. And thank you for, once again, about 50% of the polling. So we're going to go on to oxygen systems and Mohammed Amil.
I see a few questions about the CPAP. The following question are regarding CPAP forwarding by a group.
Farid, we're going to go on to the next poll and we're going to show the results of the poll. Thank you. Mohammed?
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Tom, for introducing me. Shall we go ahead with the oxygen summary?
Please.
Yeah. So next 2 minutes are mine. Thank you. So I'll be taking you through a brief overview of the WHO-CED critical topic webinar that we did on oxygen systems, and it was held on May 5th. And so it was moderated by me, and main presenter was Ashnafi Hussain. And from WHO, we had Adriana Velasquez and Laura Ale. So basically what we discussed in the oxygen systems component was how do you basically quantify oxygen demand and identify oxygen sources that are available and select appropriate surge sources to best respond to COVID-19 patient needs, especially in low and middle income countries? That was our focus. So what we initially discussed was that data from China suggests that majority of patients, that is 80% of the patients, will have mild or moderate illnesses, and that only 15% of them will have severe illnesses requiring oxygen therapy, and only 5% will be critically ill and requiring intensive care units. Amongst them, a lot of them would require ventilatory support. So we basically discussed various flow of oxygen which would be required for children, for adults. Within adults, what were the flow rates for non-invasive, for invasive ventilation systems. And the main focus of the agenda around was what were the primary sources of oxygen. And we discussed how oxygen generating plants are very self-sufficient and reliable mode of generating oxygen, and that they were only dependent on power and not dependent on any supplier or supply chain issues that we generally have. Then we discussed liquid oxygen through cryogenic tanks, which is not power dependent, but certainly supply dependent and a bit costly as compared to oxygen generator plants. Then you have, in the smaller units, you have oxygen concentrators and oxygen cylinders. So primarily we have two strategies. One is generate and supply, the oxygen generators and concentrator, or store and supply, that is oxygen cylinders or liquid oxygen cryogenic tanks. We also discussed how oxygen storage and intra-hospital distribution happens. Within oxygen cylinders, you had two strategies to supply. One was near to the patients within the ICUs or within the wards. But then the challenge in the COVID-infested environments is that this oxygen cylinders carries a lot of infection with itself. So what we discussed was that pipeline for intra-hospital distribution network is a very, very important critical element, which in current scenario lacks in a lot of LMICs, but this could be the next focus area if we want to have more sustainable oxygen systems throughout. We also discussed some of the oxygen needs estimations that we have. Needs estimation were primarily bifurcated amongst the severely ill patient and the critically ill patient. So severely ill patient, which will have raw oxygen therapy at 10 liters per minute, and critically ill patients at 30 liters per minute. However, countries were requested to reassess their needs based on the equipment specific changes, and there are a lot of other parameters around them. So we also discussed the oxygen surge plan. How do you ensure that various sources of oxygen are used at its best? And developing an oxygen surge plan requires you to actually look into what capabilities do you currently have, whether you have spaces for various oxygen generator plants or the liquid oxygen tanks, whether you have power backup or not, whether you have sufficient supplies around it or
30
not.
seconds, Emil.
Yes, concluding it now. And whenever we are planning for a robust oxygen systems, we have to look at the overall oxygen systems and in fact the medical gas pipeline system. So it's always good to look at the air pipeline, the pipeline for nitrous oxide as well. Look for various distribution systems, regulatory regulations and conditioning around it, delivery mechanisms, patient monitoring, pulse oximeters, power supply. All these are very, very critical components. And if in case you do not have pipelines, you're looking at oxygen cylinders alone, please do look at how do you disinfect them so that handlers of these cylinders use it very, very safely. Over to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Of course, there's about 25% of you have responded to the poll and continue to do that. And remember that I mentioned at the beginning, by June 8th, we will write out these full synthesis and summaries of the 6 or 7 topics that I've mentioned in the email a couple of days ago. And to the 6 that we have there, which is availability, maintenance, training, coordination at various levels, we'll add the clinical perspective, of course. So that'll be the 6 that I showed you plus one more, 7. So, and in terms of the PowerPoints that the people are presenting right now from, that will be in that synthesis document, in that white paper document that'll come out June 8th. All the kinds of remarks that you're hearing from the chairs of these sessions now will be in that. And once again, you know, the questions and answers, not only from before in those specific topic sessions and in this summary town hall, the Q&A will be posted on the CED website that we sent you to before. Any of the panelists, do you see any questions here on the topic of oxygen that you want to respond to?
So one of the things that we talked about during the webinar on oxygen, as Emil was summarizing so well, is the issue of safety and having oxygen sources of various types, the piped in, the tank, the bottled oxygen, or the manufactured on-site oxygen. It might require some compressors. It might require some oil-based contraption that with oxygen and a heating source can create fires. So we at that time have several questions about the safety and the proper use of such a system of sourcing, distributing, connecting, delivering, and finally monitoring at the patient side. So I just want to highlight that there are specific regulations relating to safe use of oxygen, specifically around prevention of fires. And as you know, there are news reports that some ventilators in use caused fires in hospitals. So we need to be aware of that.
Adriana, I know in the area of oxygen and oxygen concentrators that WHO is with, you know, led by you with help from Ali and others are planning a send out, a shipment to several LMIC countries. Can you comment on that?
Ale, do you want to comment on the procurement part? Alejandra, you there?
Yep, need to unmute.
Well, many oxygen concentrators are being purchased by WHO to send to the member states, but this is based on the requirements and that member states have submitted to WHO. So we can report on the numbers later because they are now in the process of being purchased and then to be able to be sent.
But that's happening in early June is what I heard last.
Well, the thing is that it takes time because
Sure.
the moment you put the purchase order to the moment that finally the devices can arrive, so it has to be the manufacturing and then the delivery. So it is not immediate, no, absolutely.
But the good news is the process is working.
And the process is ongoing. The process is ongoing. No? I just want to acknowledge that I did a mistake to all of you. I apologize. We didn't put an option that says none. So if you have nothing to share, nothing as a challenge or so, then the poll does not give that option. So for those that have nothing to share in the third question that says, do you have technical information or procedures? Please just choose the last one, reuse and decontamination, and then we will take it as, or better, we will take it as none, because otherwise we would never know if you had any.
Adriana, we forgive you. We're going to move on to Toby Clark and Pulsox.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, IFMB-CED and WHO. Pulse oximetry, we had a town hall on May 15th, and it was well attended. I want to thank Kito Fukuta from Japan, who was the co-chair of that session, all the panelists. In terms of the speakers, we were fortunate to have Adriana Velasquez lead off that particular town hall. And important statement, pulse oximetry being an indispensable medical device essential for patients receiving oxygen. And it's something that's needed through all stages of healthcare, from primary level to the tertiary intensive care. I think a good comment that came out of that was it's the fifth vital sign, as Yadin David made that statement. Adriana went through the WHO resources on priority medical devices. They're robust, they're high quality, they're freely available. I won't spend too much time discussing those in the interest of time, but certainly a super resource for everyone to utilize. Answered a lot of the questions that came up in the chat on the Q&A. So we had a great speaker, Pauline Baguti from Rwanda, that talked about the clinical side of pulse oximetry use and the importance and the use of it in triage and screening. It's a key area as an early warning device for patients who have experienced coughing for, say, a week, recently traveled, been exposed to COVID-19 positive individuals. So this, he discussed the use of it, emergency department, primary care, home, etc. And this was an important learning experience. In the hospital setting, such as an ICU, he also discussed the essential application of pulse oximeters for applying the Kigali modification to the Berlin Protocol, which is very important in low and middle income countries who don't have lab-based blood analysis of oxygenation levels. So by using the SpO2 and the FiO2 and some measurements, the oxygenation threshold for diagnosing respiratory distress syndrome is utilized, and that's very effective. So thank you, Dr. Bengati. In terms of clinical engineering, we had Sharifu and Ali and Dan Schuster comment on the use in Tanzania for clinical engineering, doing an analysis of fingertip pulse oximeters, determining that in many cases they are less accurate, particularly in the hypoxic ranges, below 85 or 90%. However, they're still valuable for screening because they show trends towards hypoxemia, and they're also useful in absolute readings in that range of 85 to 90. Clinical engineering testing using simulators is typically better than self-tests, as it allows for 2-point calibrations, and that's an important check of accuracy. However, they did discuss some of the problems that occurred related to temperature effects. We were also had Yadin David and Elliot Sloan talk about the global approval bodies for medical devices, CE Mark and FDA. There are other bodies throughout the world that basically provide approval. In the case of the FDA, it really only provides clearance for devices. The FDA, they do not evaluate or test the accuracy, safety, or other performance. They refer to standards, and those standards are submitted, the compliance with those standards are submitted by the manufacturers. So they're not really evaluating devices. This led on to a discussion with Adriana and others on the panel regarding devices having approval, and this goes throughout the whole priority medical device field, medical grade versus non-medical grade devices. In the US, we would call those consumer devices, the non-medical grade. So an example in terms of pulse oximetry, wellness or sport classified pulse oximeters. So the panelists were Kostika Twanza, Dan Schuster, Tom Judd, Elliot Sloan, Yadin David. It was a very active session. We had over 30 questions and answers that came out, and those are mostly answered by our panelists and experts, and we will get those out to everyone. So there's still a lot of work to do. We can only achieve this by sharing, questioning, and working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Are we, all right, so I'm sharing the poll results. Are there any questions in pulse oximetry area that the panel wants to answer or sees? Seeing a lot about the biggest challenge for pulse oximetry is specifications.
Well, this is Elliot. I'll point out that one of the challenges we have with the enormous demand for fingertip pulse oximeters is that at this point, there are very few vendors who have devices that have traceability back to CE or FDA submissions. So I would encourage everyone to include that in their requirements and try to obtain devices with that documentation, if at all possible. It is really a struggle because the global supply is depleted, and even in the US, most devices are being drop shipped directly from China. And we're having difficulty sourcing documented devices.
Thanks, Elliot. Other responses?
Well, pulse oximetry is basically a lot of the original results, and pulse oximetry is based on empirical studies. There certainly is science behind it. It's kind of like non-invasive blood pressure, where each individual manufacturer has a algorithm for determining diastolic value. In pulse oximetry, when we get down to the hypoxic range, that's when problems occur. So looking at specifications for that range is most important.
And I'd also like to point out that in the supplement that we have posted at the webinar page, there is substantial research that has been done to document inaccuracies with persons with dark skin pigmentation and also sickle cell anemia. And those are both common conditions that have to be aware of. And apparently the inaccuracies read falsely high O2 levels in persons with those skin or sickle cell types. So one has to be very cautious in using, for example, an 80% threshold if the device is by its limitations inaccurate.
Thank you, Elliot. We're going to move on now to the ventilators with Jennifer Jackson. And after that, we'll take a little bit of time, maybe past the hour, to try to respond to some of the other questions we've seen from all the topics. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. We had our session on ventilators earlier this week, and it was a very informative session. We started off with a really great presentation by Ale Velez from WHO, outlining the WHO resources that are available, including technical specifications, and how these might relate to other topics that we've already covered, because as we all know, ventilators are just one part of the larger ecosystem when it comes to caring for patients with COVID. This presentation was followed up by a really in-depth presentation by Tom Larkin, going over some of the really important details of the functionality of a ventilator and how those relate back to the physiology of the patient. Briefly touching on the different types of ventilation control, whether it's pressure or volume, and speaking to some of the different types of ventilators, as there have been many discussions about the larger, I would say, more intricate, complex ventilator technologies that might be out there, scaling down to some that are fairly straightforward in terms of their function, performing the essential duties that a ventilator would be expected to complete. Following that, we had Dr. Banguti from Rwanda sharing with us the clinical need, really touching on and a great follow-up to Tom's presentation, because as we can talk about the different complexities and the different, if you will, bells and whistles that might come with some of these new ventilators that are on the market, when it comes down to how to best serve all the patients, whether it's in LMIC or also in developed nations, if it's really not a feature that is needed right now, is it needed? And is there a way to scale up prototypes that really can address the basic needs for ventilation? And again, that could be through some of the more complex ventilators. There's also the high flow non-invasive ventilation technologies that are becoming more and more, I think prevalent in the wake of COVID. then I'm trying to think of what the other summary was. Most of the follow-up that we had based on these concerns, whether it was the cost, the ability to put some of this ventilation technology into the LMIC locations, really having to look at the education and how to use the devices. Because again, many of these different ventilators might have different ways to use them, and there's not always the availability of the training, whether it's the clinical training or the technical training. And as I mentioned before, really the topic on how to fully support these ventilators, not just from a human factors point of view, but also from the actual instrumentation and support. So oxygen supplies and how to best provide what is needed in order to have a functioning ventilation system. Following that, we did open up the session for Q&A, where we discussed some of the more prevalent questions, again, how to deal with the oxygen supplies and how we can look at different perhaps sources for oxygen. There was also discussion on the decontamination and what is the best and proper way for cleaning and decontaminating some of this technology before its next use on another patient. And other highlights that we discussed is using ventilation type technology in settings such as the OR. We did touch on the notion that, when these rich oxygen areas, such as whether it's the operating theaters or in some cases ICUs, but there is still that risk of fire. So again, it goes back to not just the proper use of the ventilator technology itself, but how to really be aware of the entire system required in the environment where the technology is being used in order to be safe and effective, not just for the patients, but for the staff using the technology. And we don't have a write-up just yet, but we look forward to having a full summary of this session that we did on Tuesday coming up in the next week or so. So thank you all, and that concludes my summary.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We heard two amazing things from amazing encouragement and an amazing challenge from Adriana on Tuesday in the ventilator town hall. The encouragement was she had just come from the World Health Assembly of WHO that morning, where she said 20 presidents were speaking of countries and talked about medical equipment. And we all know at the back of a lot of people's minds in my country and probably yours is ventilators. So this is a big time in history for clinical engineers to step forward and help their countries around ventilators in the way we're trying to do now. The other thing, though, she said was that the huge challenges, and as Jennifer just spoke to, many people need training on the ventilators that are coming into their country. So I'd like, Adriana, you mentioned in your opening comments about how France stood up this WHO Academy, an AV resource that people like ourselves can come alongside and provide videos on training. Would you talk more about that, Adriana? That's one of the big challenges from all these 5 topics I know that remains.
But Tom and Jennifer, yes, actually, one of the main issues is the products will appear now and will be available in the countries, but then what about the training, how to use it, how to calibrate it, how to maintain it, and how to use it safely. So that's why WHO is now working with the WHO Academy to put these courses together. So we will welcome your expertise if some of you are willing to help on this area on the training, or you have expertise on training on either the maintenance, and so they have to be generic trainings. 2 consultants are being hired in WHO to put together that work and integrate all the input that we can receive from experts like you. So yeah, the main idea is to have this in the apps in the WHO Academy to be able to be helpful for those that are receiving the equipment. They are not branded specific, so they're generic. And we will still ask the manufacturers to give the specifics on their brands over.
Any other comments on that from the other panelists? On training, I can tell you CED will throw our full weight into, with all of your help, into providing good training here.
I'd like to briefly mention that there are 4 or 5 organizations providing free online training for physicians and nurses, Harvard University among them. We have a list of those that are available. They provide training and certification that may or may not be suitable for your particular setting. Also point out that the emergency use authorization of ventilators and other products has presented a real challenge for everyone, because it's not clear after the authorization has been suspended how those products might be used. It's a longer discussion, but I want to bring those topics up.
I want to mention that, go ahead.
I was going to say, just to quickly follow up, we do have a question there that I think we will answer offline, but very much to Elliot's point, there has been an increased level of manufacturing, sometimes from non-traditional ventilation companies, trying to bring forth these ventilators for this emergency use. And the question was, how is the application? That's a very gray question to be answered, and with some thought applied to it. So we'll definitely get to that question offline.
I just wanted to point out the importance of the incoming inspection of ventilators that you purchase at this time, because they're being rapidly manufactured. We've had a lot of failures on the ventilators that have come into our shop, about 28% failure rate.
Could I just jump in there for a second?
Yeah, and I just want to make a comment about you, Tom. We had this amazing presentation by Tom Larkin from Ireland, who's worked at the bedside as a clinical engineer on intensive care teams for 25 years. And he's got longer seminars, webinars on things that clinical engineers should know about ventilators. So he's going to share, maybe not right this moment, but links to how we can join that training. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I think I just refer back to a point you made about clinical engineering in general and the opportunities to get involved more clinically. So I think there's an opportunity now, there's a big sort of an open goal, if you like, for clinical engineers to move more into the clinical environment and not be based somewhere else in the hospital, come up whenever there's a problem with the ventilator, but get involved with the clinical side of it. There's a huge opportunity there now for people with an interest to do that. And I think that's where the profession needs to go, if you like, into the future, get more clinically involved with the teams, embedded in the units that they're working in, and become more clinical as well as technical and scientific.
And we, the IFMB Clinical Engineering Division is very involved with credentialing, certification, registration around the world for our profession. And we do see a trend, as Tom just said. Many of you know that in Japan, 50% of their time is super users of high-tech equipment. So but not only in Japan, other countries, there is a trend towards clinical engineers being more involved at the bedside than historically there. And I know Dr. David's written about the physicians and nurses, not the nurses, but the physicians are moving further away from the bedside, and so the engineers may want to move closer to the bedside in many situations.
And that's really important, that we get away from what I used to call the sort of screwdriver and test lung approach to solving problems with ventilators, where the engineer was called up, the alarms are going off, the patient's hopping off the bed, what's wrong? They stick the test lung on, said ventilator's fine, goes back on the patient, and there's still massive problems. So we have to move on from just that role and really get involved and get more knowledgeable about the application of the technology, and, as I say, integrated with the teams.
Thanks, Tom. Are there other panelists that want to respond to questions they've heard before we give Adriana some closing comments?
There was a question, or mostly comment, from Brazil about definition of a product. What is a ventilator? Essentially, mechanical ventilator is about 100 years old, invented during the need for iron lungs, and then continue on from that. And now we're changing definition, because if you have ambu bag with some compression plates around it, is that referred to as a ventilator? And we need to realize that this season of such a pandemic era is changing the definition of a product, as well as the regulation and specification. So stay up with that, make sure that you understand the changes in emergency use and other standards and guidance, and that your role is to still make sure that the product is safe.
In fact, Dr. David, the biggest response in all the 5 polls was safe use. So I know we'll try to write up more
Hello.
comments about that in our synthesis. Go ahead.
Hello, this is Tomo. It's a part of the Japanese clinical engineer, and we are using lots of the equipment and included for the respiratory things. And I'm thinking that we needed know how to use the machine, but also we need to see the patient. So as we think about the patient lung problem, what's going on, and also how can we maintain? We have to think about both sides. So Japanese clinical engineer has a lot of experience, and we can happy to share with you guys too. So if you guys have a question, please talk to the Japanese people too. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. CED can help facilitate that. Thanks, Tomo.
Tom, I have a comment on the discussion, very interesting going on before, rising from Yadin about and Toby about the fact that FDA clearance doesn't mean that the device is effective. Eventually, that is just safe, but not at all effective. Well, this is all going to change in Europe now with the new regulation. They have introduced this criteria, and the medical device can only be CE marked if it proves to meet and to deliver the performance which is intended by the manufacturer. So things are changing. And now, if it was not for the COVID, this would have been starting to be enforced by 26 of this month, so in 1 week time. But now this has been delayed to 1 year time. But in 1 year time, everything CE market will have to prove not only to be safe, but also to be as effective as intended by the manufacturer. I think this is a huge revolution. This is a great result of biomedical engineers and clinical engineer community in Europe. And I can envisage that FDA will follow up on that.
So Leandro, the FDA is already including safe and effective use. So that's already included within the FDA regulatory process. What the point that you're making that is so important is that we need to read those specifications to understand the intended use. Because if we assume that the ventilator is intended to do something different than what we want to do for the patient, then all the argument about safe and effectiveness is going by the wayside because it's not what intended. So that's why I keep saying, make sure you read the manuals, make sure you read the standards and the guidelines. But you're making a good point.
And we'll try to provide as much clarity as we can in our white papers, our summary documents here in a couple of weeks to these challenging questions. One more question or comment from the panelists before we turn to Adriana, please, at 6 minutes after. All right, well, thank you very much. Adriana? We've got you unmuted, I think.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much to IFMB. Thank you for all the panelists, all the participants, all the experts. We are very grateful for your participation, and we look forward to having another series maybe later once we've done the training material or other things. So let's see what comes next. But please, our best recommendation is please stay safe. Please share that this virus is dangerous and that we really need to take care of it. And the best use of the technology that we need is to be thinking always on the patient's benefit, you know, and the patient's safety. So if we're doubting about something, better don't use it. No? So I think that's just, let's stay in the safe place, and the best wishes to all, and many thanks to everybody. And please look into the WHO website. We will be updating information, and then also through IFMB, I guess we'll be sharing it with all of you. And if you have a training material and so, please send it to Caliroy, to Tom, because we couldn't capture your emails or phones or something of who has information. Please share it so that we can start using it for training. Thank you very much to all. Stay safe. And we have a great work to do as clinical engineers. Let's do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience. And we'll be talking to you again soon. Bye for now.
Okay, guys. Adios.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao,
Au
ciao.
revoir.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, grazie.
Bye. Bye bye.